My name is Kevin Berger, and I am the author of Atheism is Untenable. On this channel, I don't engage in apologetics. Instead, I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. This is Justified Nonetheless. Please like, share, subscribe, and turn on those notifications.
Again, my precious little tumbleweeds. Just as a reminder, I am irreligious and agnostic, and I am not an apologist. I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. One of the never-ending claims is the idea of this concept of non-belief, which I have tried desperately to get people to understand is intrinsically incoherent. When I challenge people on their alleged lack of belief or absence of belief, they often invoke the gumball analogy or the courtroom analogy, which I have discussed at length. A couple of other avenues that they will often use are to argue that an absence of belief or not belief or whatever is the only logical option, as if it's a choice, and it's not. And another one is that non-belief is the default position. So let's dissect that. Keep in mind, we are talking about doxastic dispositions here, not epistemic dispositions. Belief, or BSP, is a propositional attitude canonically expressible as SA that P, such that S is aware of P, where S designates the subject, A designates the attitude, P designates the proposition, and the attitude is such that the truth value of P is greater than the false value of P. Keep in mind, we're talking about the attitude or the perception of the truth and value of the proposition and not the actual truth and false value of the proposition. Disbelief or belief in the negation, then, BS not P, is a propositional attitude expressible such as SA that P, such that S is aware of P and the attitude is such that the truth value of P is less than the false value of P. And then non-belief or the absence of belief, not BSP, is the hypothetical propositional attitude expressible as SA that P, such that S is aware of P and the attitude is such that the truth value of P is equal to the false value of P. Again, these doxastic dispositions are independent of epistemic dispositions that speak to what the subject knows to be true. Yes, it is possible to believe that a claim is true without knowing or asserting it to be true. Therefore, we can agree to the points that not believing a proposition does not imply knowing that the negation is true, affirming that the negation is true, certainty that the negation is true, justification in the belief that the negation is true, immalleability of one's position, wanting to believe that the negation is true, caring whether or not the negation is true, and yet none of these gets us to an absence of belief. I don't believe P is as much of a propositional attitude toward P as are I believe P is true and I believe P is untrue, and that by extension not P is true. Now consider a set of all propositions. We can divide this into two sets. Let A equal awareness. We then have a set of ASP and a set of not ASP, where a subject is either aware of a proposition or is not aware of a proposition. The latter being the state of innocence, as dubbed by Dr. Graham Oppy, an atheist philosopher of religion. Now, let's consider propositions of which the subject is aware. We can divide those into three subsets. We have BSP, which is belief. We have BS not P, which is disbelief or belief in the negation. And we have not BSP, which is non-belief or the absence of belief. However, remember, this is a hypothetical. To attempt to subsume innocence, the set where a subject is not aware of the proposition, into non-belief or the absence of belief, not BSP, results in a violation of the principle of non-contradiction, as this would entail that the subject is both aware of and not aware of the proposition. Furthermore, this results in the commission of a variety of logical fallacies. There's the Mott and Bailey. Within the context of atheism, if the discussion is about self-identifying atheists and the attempted subsumption of innocence makes for a position that is seemingly easier to defend, a red herring, where, within the context of atheism, if the discussion is about self-identifying atheists, the dispositions of those who are unaware of the proposition and do not self-identify as atheists is irrelevant. But most importantly, a fallacy of proving too much. Because within the context of atheism, if a doxastic disposition is arbitrarily assigned to subjects with regard to the proposed existence of a deity by default, then one can arbitrarily assign subjects' doxastic disposition to any proposition, which results in absurdities. So, to recap, doxastic dispositions are not the same thing as epistemic dispositions, and we can explain this through a logical syllogism. Premise 1. If subjects' lives are affected by causation beyond their control, then even in a compatibilistic model, literal, unrestricted free will does not exist. Premise 2. If literal, unrestricted free will does not exist, then doxastic involuntarism is true. Premise 3. If doxastic involuntarism is true, then the absence of belief is an ought and not necessarily an is. Premise 4. If the absence of belief is an ought but not necessarily an is, then propositional logic is only applicable to the epistemic ought, which is the descriptive disposition. It is not applicable to the doxastic is, which is the normative disposition. Premise 5. Subjects' lives are affected by causation beyond their control. Conclusion, therefore, literal unrestricted free will does not exist. Conclusion 2, therefore, doxastic involuntarism is true. Conclusion 3, therefore, propositional logic is only applicable to the epistemic ought, which is the descriptive disposition. It is not applicable to the doxastic is, which is the normative disposition. To summarize, propositional logic can only tell us what beliefs are justified. It can tell us what a subject should believe. It cannot tell us what a subject does believe. The arguments, I don't have enough evidence, I don't have good reason, the only logical position, etc., can be rebutted with one simple question. Does anyone, anywhere, ever believe anything without justification? Because the answer to that question is obviously affirmative, then the presumption of an absence of belief has no epistemic warrant. The existence of self-identifying non-resistant atheists is illustrative of the reality of doxastic involuntarism and highlights another issue if one wishes to argue that it is possible to believe or not believe a proposition through sheer force of will. Either 1. Self-identifying non-resistant atheists are dishonest in the expression of their doxastic dispositions, or 2. Self-identifying non-resistant atheists are mistaken in their own doxastic dispositions. In the case of the fourth scenario, in which one asserts that the self-identifying non-resistant atheists are dishonest in their expression of their doxastic dispositions, one would incur the burden of proof for the claim that it is, in fact, the case, and it would likely involve the commission of a variant of an omniscience fallacy, as the claimant's argument would then be that they know the cognitive state better than those expressing non-resistance. In the case of the latter scenario, where one asserts that self-identifying non-resistant atheists are mistaken in their own doxastic dispositions, this necessarily raises the question as how the claimant knows that they are not mistaken about their own doxastic disposition. To summarize this, to discuss subjects who are unaware of a proposition in terms of belief, disbelief, or absence of the same is intrinsically incoherent, and as such, the attempted subsumption of innocence into atheism is unwarranted. Doxastic involuntarism is true, rendering the absence of belief an ought rather than necessarily an is. Because the absence of belief is an ought, but not necessarily an is, its presumption is unwarranted. Because both the attempted subsumption of innocence and the presumption of the absence of belief are unwarranted, the notion of the absence of belief as distinct from disbelief as the default state or null hypothesis in terms of doxastics is also unwarranted. Because the notion of the absence of belief as the default state is unwarranted, the absence of belief must be substantiated in some other way. Alright, so that's my argument for the idea that no, you cannot presume an absence of belief, even though we can agree that it is the only logical option. As long as belief isn't a choice, that simply does not matter.